Friends, hello to everyone. Today we are going to break down the main political news at the start of 2026. The appointment of the head of the main intelligence directorate, Kyrylo Budanov, as the new head of the office of the president of Ukraine, replacing Andriy Yermak. This news has already sparked a lot of questions, discussions, and even some confusion. Why him specifically? What does this personnel reshuffle at the top of the government mean? And most importantly, how could this affect the rotation? Could it influence the course of the war and the internal situation in the country? Let's not rush. Let's calmly and step by step figure this out together. Let's start with how this happened and the real reasons behind it. Appointing Budanov as the head of the presidential office is a top-level decision. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, friends. And so to not waste your time, I'll get started right away. So today, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, announced that he met with Kyrylo Budanov and offered him to head the presidential office. Pay attention to the president's wording. They are actually very telling. Let's quote it. Right now, Ukraine needs to focus more on security issues, the development of the defense and security forces of Ukraine, as well as on the diplomatic track in negotiations. And the presidential office will serve first and foremost to fulfill such tasks for our state. Kyrylo has specialized experience in these areas and sufficient strength to achieve results. I have also instructed the new head of the presidential office, in cooperation with the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine and other necessary leaders and institutions, to update and present for approval the strategic foundations of the defense and development of our state, as well as the next steps. End of Zelensky's quote. Is that clear? Security, defense forces, diplomatic track. The presidential office now has to work specifically in these areas. This is a directly formulated task, so to speak. Then, friends, after this announcement, Volodymyr Zelensky's advisor, Dmytro Litvin, confirmed that all the formal appointment procedures are already underway, and an hour after Litvin's message, a response from Budanov himself appeared. He meticulously crafted the subsequent passages, carefully articulating the detailed account of the information that was about to be presented. His diligent efforts culminated in the creation of the comprehensive text that is now being shared for consideration and review. For me, it is an honor and a responsibility in this historic time for Ukraine to focus on the critically important issues of our state's strategic security. Thank you for your trust. Thank you to all my fellow fighters and to the entire team of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine for our joint work. We must continue to do our part, strike the enemy, defend Ukraine, and work towards achieving a just peace. So now Budanov is officially the new head of the office of the President of Ukraine. Here, it's worth reminding about a few extremely important things. So about 3 weeks or a month ago, the president announced that he was considering candidates for the position of head of the office. There were 5 candidates. Who were they? Denis Shmihal, Mikhailo Fedorov, Serhiy Kizlytsya from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Kyrylo Budanov, and Pavlo Palisa. The president made a separate comment about Budanov at that time. Budanov heads intelligence, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense. It's an important area, and he could be the head of the office, just like each of these candidates. But we need to think, because after all, he is involved in intelligence. So we need to understand who would replace him at the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense. By the way, here's an insider tip for you, friends. According to my information, Oleg Ivashchenko will head the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine instead of Budanov. Right now, as you know, he is the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service. Basically, you don't need to be an insider to understand that, logically speaking. It is Ivashchenko or anyone else in his position with a different last name who should take the lead. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Now, another question. Who will take Ivashchenko's seat? But we'll see how it actually turns out. Let's get back to Budanov, actually. Do you remember, friends, how in previous episodes, we assumed that the candidates with a military background had the best chances of getting the position of head of the president's office? Palisa or Budanov? We discussed this with you. Why did I come to that conclusion back then? Given the situation after Yermak's resignation, and you know all about those scandals, the head of the president's office had to be a person with authority. Who are the most authoritative people right now? That's right, it's the military. Besides that, we also noted that the role of the military in the Ukrainian negotiating team has significantly increased. We saw new names there. The chief of the general staff, Hanatov, and the head of the main intelligence directorate, Budanov. And even then, we said that the key element of the renewal, the key element of the negotiation format is the official participation of Kyrylo Budanov in the talks. He was in Geneva. He was in the United Arab Emirates for the negotiations. At the meeting of the head of the main intelligence directorate in Abu Dhabi with US Army Minister Dan Driscoll, the focus was specifically on resolving the war. In other words, Budanov is actually acceptable to the Americans. It was the same before. Actually, I'll let you in on a little secret. There were many attempts to dismiss Budanov from his position as head of the main intelligence directorate, but it was the Americans and specifically the previous Biden administration who prevented this from happening. But we'll probably make a separate episode about that. So once again, Budanov is acceptable to everyone. That's how it turns out. I believe that Zelensky included Budanov in this negotiation track, specifically to test him before the appointment, to see how he performs in the diplomatic arena, how he interacts with allies, and whether he can handle work that goes beyond purely intelligence-related tasks, so to speak. Now, what does Budanov's appointment as head of the president's office mean? According to my information, Zelensky has recently been choosing a new head of the presidential office between two candidates, Kyrylo Budanov and Mikhailo Fedorov. Choosing Fedorov would have meant preparing for elections and placing greater emphasis on the domestic political component. Moreover, at the last moment, by the way, Fedorov also decided to put forward his own personnel demands, and so on. What does the choice of Budanov tell us? It indicates that more attention and resources will be focused specifically on strong diplomacy and working with external partners, and the resolved issues of the development of the armed forces of Ukraine, which will undoubtedly strengthen our negotiating positions. Please understand, friends, the appointment of Budanov as head of the president's office is not about personnel reshuffles, it's not about internal intrigues, it's about changing the very logic. A change in the very logic of governing the country during wartime. In short, the state is finally switching to the mode we are at war and we think as in war, not as in peacetime with war in the background. That is, from a political point of view, this means that the presidential office ceases to be a place for delicate political balancing, lengthy consultations, and playing rating games. Budanov is not a politician in the classical sense. He has no party, no personal faction, no capital, no oligarchs, and so on. Although it's obvious that there are ambitions, but as experience shows, his main logic is, how will this work in practice? And this, by the way, automatically hits the old political system where many decisions were made. They were made precisely through agreements, through compromises, certain mutual obligations, and so on. In fact, this is a signal to everyone inside the country that the main question now is not who benefits, but whether it helps the war, the parliament, parts of the government, or various influence groups. It will be very difficult here. Conflicts are almost inevitable, I think. But this is also a signal outward to the West, clearly showing that Ukraine is not entering a mode of waiting for peace at any cost. And it is not planning to simply hold out until negotiations. That is, the war is seen as long and tough, and diplomacy is viewed as a tool, not some kind of magic wand. From a military point of view, the essence here is even simpler, as it seems to me. When a person from intelligence is at the center of political decision-making, the classic gap disappears. The classic disconnect. That is, the military knows one thing, the politicians allow something else, and a third thing never even reaches the top. Decisions start being made faster and more decisively, without any pauses like, let's discuss, let's see how people react, and so on. This, I think, will no longer happen. Obviously, with this kind of setup, the focus will not be on frontal assaults or on anything flashy. The emphasis in the statements is precisely on pinpoint, painful strikes, on special operations, on targeting the enemy's rear, their logistics, fleet, and air defense. By the way, there's also an interesting point about the people making these decisions. And it's not about mass. Friends, this is, so to speak, about the enemy's nervous system. But there are also risks, and let's talk about them as well, because when intelligence, strategy, and political decisions all converge in one center, it's very effective, but also a bit dangerous. The balance of checks and restraints weakens, and within the country, there arises a fear of excessive concentration of power, plus there are public expectations. Budanov has already become almost a symbol of a secret plan, a turning point, and so on. And here it's important not to expect a miracle in a few months, because it's not going to happen. War doesn't work that way. In the end, the real meaning of the appointment is actually very simple. The state stops pretending that it's possible to wage war and live under a political regime at the same time. A time of peace. The focus is now on toughness, speed, and unconventional solutions. And to the enemy, we're simply saying, look, this will be long, and it definitely won't get any easier. Now, about who Budanov is, we know a lot about him. I've made many episodes about him, but let's turn specifically, so to speak, to his biography. A few important details to the portrait of the new head of the presidential office. He was born in Kiev in 1986. He received his military education at the Odessa Institute of Land Forces from 2003 to 2007. Budanov has been participating in combat operations since 2014. In 2016, he was involved in the special operation raid in Crimea, which was directed against the Russian FSB. During 2018 to 2020, he carried out a number of secret missions. After the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022 under his command, GUAR units took part in the battles for the liberation of Bucha, Irpin, Dmitrivka, and Kapitanivka, as well as in the defense of Sieverodonetsk. In 2024, Budanov also completed his studies at the Kyiv-Mohyla Business School, where he took the strategic architecture course. So when it comes down to it, what do we have? First, the priorities have changed. The Ukrainian authorities have clearly determined that security, diplomacy, and victory come first. Domestic policy is taking a back seat. Second, there is a change in the logic of governance. The state is finally shifting to a wartime management model. Decisions will be made faster, more strictly, with a focus on practical effectiveness for the front rather than political expediency. Third, this is a signal to both allies and the enemy. To our partners, we are showing that we are serious and are betting on strength against the enemy. We are showing that things will not get easier. We are preparing for a long game, focusing on your weak points. Fourth, there are certain risks and expectations because this is already emerging. This is already noticeable in the media, in the Telegram segment. The new system may be more effective, but it is also more vulnerable due to the concentration of influence. And most importantly, results will be expected from it, which may not be obvious from the outside. Overall, friends, Budanov's appointment is not just another personnel rotation. It is a strategic decision that changes the very architecture of decision-making in the country at the highest level. This is a step from the politics of war to military policy. That is what is important to understand. Whether this will be effective, only time will tell. But the fact that the system will operate under different rules is already a reality. What do you think about this? How do you assess this appointment? In your opinion, what should be the main focus right now? How do you feel about Budanov as the new head of the presidential office? Please write your thoughts in the comments below this video. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves and see you next time.